So meeting is being recorded. My name is Rima Musa, and I'm the Cybersecurity Awareness Coordinator here at UC Santa Barbara. So as you may know, it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month throughout the month of October, and the importance of cybersecurity in daily life is perhaps greater than ever. So technology alone can't always protect our computers and information, and being aware of information security issues and following best practices are excellent ways to protect yourself, your family, and the UC community as a whole. And attending sessions like these is a really great way to increase your awareness and help yourself and your community be cyber safe. So given the current COVID-19 pandemic and life online conditions that we've been privy to for the past few months, all of our programming this month is entirely virtual and system-wide across the UC system. So we have events from many of our different campuses across the UC system that you are totally free to attend. So if you'd like to check out some of the other great webinars and virtual programming that we have going on this month, you can click the link that will be sent out in the chat momentarily. It is sent. And you can look through the entire events calendar and register for any or all of the events via Zoom and add them to your calendar, whichever calendar you use, so you won't miss any. And we have a couple of events, Chad, coming up as well. So for this session, we are joined by Dr. Chad Spensky, who is the founder and CEO of Allthenticate and a former gaucho. And we'll be hearing from him in just a bit on Smartcard security. But first off, I'd like to briefly introduce him, and I'll do that as he gets his screen sharing all set up and ready to go. And then we'll hear from him and save the last 15 or so minutes for a Q&A, and you can share your questions through the Q&A function. Please try to keep them through the Q&A function rather than the chat. It makes it easier for us. And we'll try to get through as many as we can before we wrap up at 1 o'clock. So a little bit about Dr. Chad Spensky. Chad is a computer security researcher, entrepreneur, and educator who is passionate about using technology to make people's lives easier and their digital systems more secure. Chad has more than 10 years of research experience and is a lifetime hacker. Formerly, he was a member of the technical research staff at MIT Lincoln Laboratory and has since continued to help them solve some of the Department of Defense's toughest cybersecurity problems. So he received his PhD from UC Santa Barbara in 2020, and his thesis title was Securing and Analyzing Embedded Systems. He also possesses a master's in computer security from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as well as a BS in mathematics, a BS in computer science, and a minor in economics from the University of Pittsburgh. So thank you so much for joining us, Chad, and the floor is yours.
All right, it is my pleasure to be here. Hopefully everybody can see the slides at this point. So the question of today is smart cards. How smart are they really, right? So they have smart in the name, so we're assuming that something good is going on here. But what I want to address in today's talk is first, why do we have smart cards? Why do we even invent these little pieces of plastic? Are they actually secure? Like, what are they actually doing? They're kind of a mystery, right? You just carry them around and use them, but has anyone actually looked at the security of them? What do they really provide us with? And if they're so smart, why do I only have a couple of them, right? I mean, in my case, I have my credit card. That's really the only smart card in my wallet. Why don't I use them for more things? And can we do better, right? It seems like we created these things a long time ago. Technology's advanced quite a bit. What does the future look like for this kind of technology? So just to start out, what is a smart card? It looks something like this. So most credit cards that you have today are considered smart cards. You might use a badge to get into your office. This is also a smart card. A little piece of plastic with a computer embedded somewhere inside of it. So In fact, these computers can be pretty complicated, and they vary in the ways that you interface with them. So here's a nice little hierarchy of, you have chip cards. So there's contact cards, the ones like your credit card when I ask you to insert it and instead of tap it. Contactless, those are the ones that you can tap, so tap to pay or tap to get into a building. And then there's some multi-component cards that have some other features on them. But if you look at the specs here, it's kind of interesting. So they have quite a bit of memory. So they have some flash memory on there, just like a USB key would have. And more interesting is that some of these actually run full-blown operating systems. So you can see the CPU, MPU cards here actually have 816 32-bit public key with a math coprocessor. So there's actually a full-blown processor on some of these little cards you're carrying around in your wallet. So how do they work? Fundamentally, the contacts that you see on the card, you can see them enumerated out here. The top left, C1, provides voltage. C5 is a ground. So you're literally just plugging this thing in like you would plug in a microwave into your outlet. And then there's a clock and an IO line. So the clock actually drives the processor, and the IO is how you send data back and forth. So if you look at this cutout here on the right, it's literally a little microchip that's just been embedded into plastic. So they embed the microchip, they run these little bond wires out to the contacts, and it's literally, you're plugging in a small computer with the power and ground, and you're interacting with it, talking with it over the IO port. But it's, a computer stuck into a card. So why did we create these things? Like it's pretty cool that we can put a computer in our wallet, but what was sort of the motivation? One of the big ones that's sort of been used recently is that passwords, leading into the last talk I went over, passwords just generally aren't great. They're really hard to remember. They're pretty insecure to use. And from a security standpoint, this is not what you'd want to be using in really high security facilities or to manage really high security assets. The other one, carrying a full computer, is complicated, or at least at the time that smart cards came out, this was very impractical. So if you wanted to use anything other than a password where you actually wanted to use cryptography and not just the human memory, this was really the only option, to create some little micro computer that we could carry around. And from an authentication standpoint, they're pretty nice because they also become something that you have. So when you're authenticating, you typically only have 3 different metrics you could have. It's something you have with you, something you are, like a biometric, or something you know, like a password. So when it comes to authenticating, this actually satisfies the something you have criteria and does it in a very cool cryptographic way that provides a lot of security. So they're actually better than passwords and other forms of authentication. And in fact, they are. They're much better. So when you plug a smart card into your smart card reader and interact with a computer, for example, you could also think of this as a point of sale system when you're at Starbucks checking out for your latte. What happens here is that there's going to be a cryptographic challenge. That's why I have the lock, just sort of indicating that everything here is encrypted and an observer really can't see what's going on. They're going to send a challenge to the card that's going to be computed on that processor, and it can only be responded to correctly from that specific card. So it's sort of mathematically bound to the smart card that you have in your wallet. In this example, we'll say a credit card, and only that credit card could ever satisfy this challenge, meaning that it must have been you that made that purchase, or at least whoever was in possession of that credit card. This is contrary to a bunch of other forms of technology, which we'll go over, like the mag stripe, that are much easier to clone. So the smart cards have done right. You cannot clone them. It is stuck in that card forever, and you need the physical card to use to respond to any challenges. Some of them also have pins, right? Any Europeans, I'm sure, are used to the chip and pin. In the US, we just do chip and sign on our credit cards. But even when you're using them to unlock a computer or interact with computers, if anyone's used these, they typically have a pin associated with the smart card. So this kind of goes back to the same paradigm you have in a passwords, where now it's something you know and something you have. So the interface here is typically you'd plug it into the computer, The pin goes from your brain into the computer through the keyboard, into the smart card, which will then unlock the smart card. And then the computer can use it, interact with it, send challenge and responses. The problem that comes up here, as far as from an attacker's point of view, is that malware or keylogger can still observe this pin. So if your computer is infected, when you enter the pin, you could lose the pin. And the other sort of downfall here is that the card remains unlocked after the pin is entered. So you could enter the pin once legitimately. Any malware on that computer can now use it for whatever it wants to, right? So if that were your credit card, they could just make rampant purchases because the card is now unlocked. One thing they do really well, though, is they have physical tamper resistance. So like I said, the idea is that the key is going to be tied to that physical card itself, right? So if there's any way to get the key out, it breaks the fundamental assumption that this card and only this card could satisfy the request. So going from left to right here, the one thing they do that's very neat is they'll do a mesh of different contacts across every layer in the smart card. And if any of those are breached, so if you're actually trying to like probe the card or probe the chip to try to extract the key from it, if you break any of those traces, it will actually destroy the chip. So destroy the chip. So you can think of this kind of like some sci-fi things, right? Where like Mission Impossible, they have to break in, and if you hit the tripwire, boom, the whole building blows up. It's exactly that, but done at a micro scale on microelectronics. The other cool thing they have is they'll do built-in like brownout detection. There's a bunch of pretty sophisticated attacks you can do physically, which I'll go over in more detail in my next talk on embedded systems. But because I have this card, right, I can grab your credit card, I can steal it from you, and then I can go back in my lab and tinker with it. So the smart card manufacturer has actually thought through all of these things and the various attacks you can do, which is like, since you're driving the voltage, you could give it the wrong voltage, and sometimes that makes processors act a little funny. They've thought through all of that, and it's actually implemented pretty well. The other one, which is a little less, a little more subtle, I guess, is that they actually write their software in a fault-resistant way. So over here, if you're familiar with programming, we have two different if statements. Both are trying to do the same thing. You want to make sure that the person can only try so many times before you lock them out, right? So this is a way to throttle them. So say they only get 10 failed attempts. The first one at the top is the obvious one you would think of. If the pin is if the pin the user gave me is the pin I wanted, I'll unlock the card. Otherwise, I increment failed attempts. Turns out that's not going to work. The reason that doesn't work in a smart card is because if I'm a very good attacker, I'm going to try the pin, and if it doesn't unlock automatically, I can watch this through some voltage things. I will cut the power before it ever has time to increment failed attempts. So the way that the software is written in smart cards is they'll make sure to do things like always increment the counter first. So before you ever do the check, you increment the counter, so there is no way around it, and there's no way to let the attacker know if they got the pin right or wrong. So the first one, not a smart way to implement software on smart cards. But in practice, these things, because they have such high stakes, most of them are in financial transactions and really high security scenarios, they've actually thought through most of this, and the software is written in a way that would look very weird anywhere else. The one thing that I think is very interesting about smart cards, we sort of just use this name to describe all of them, but not all smart cards are created equal. So here in this picture, the one on the left has the chip on it. The one on the right just looks like a credit card. These are not the same technology. And just because it's called a smart card does not mean it's secure or have all of those really cool features that we just discussed. So I want to kind of just highlight a few that most people are probably familiar with in their daily lives and go over whether or not they are smart or how they work in general. So the first one is the mag stripe on your credit card. This is just a terrible idea. The fact that we're still using these is kind of insane to me. All of the mag stripe, all it does is it encodes the exact information that is written on the front of your card. So I think most people believe, I used to believe, that it did something intelligent. It does not. You can buy a mag stripe reader writer for like $90 and start printing your own credit cards or stealing other people's credit cards. You swipe it, it just prints what's on the front. So you could look at your friend's credit card, print it, go to the gas station, buy it. So this is one of the reasons that credit card theft is so rampant, that it's just trivially easy to clone these things and modify the mag stripe, because it's just the number on the card and the expiration date and your name. The other one, which most people are probably familiar with, that is slightly better for sure and more fun to use because it's typically tap to pay kind of stuff, contactless. So these are called proximity cards. Main reason they call them that is because they are activated if you're in a close enough proximity to the reader. Almost all of them are just used to store and retrieve data. So you can think of them as pretty much USB keys that you carry around that have been flattened and have some awesome physics stuff in them where they can actually harvest energy through their antennas. So they are powered, but the way they get power is the reader will emanate a certain radio frequency, and they will actually turn on their processor internally based on the power that's being radiated out of the reader. So they're used for all sorts of different applications, to get into your buildings, to get into your hotel rooms. Some of them are mag stripe for hotel rooms, some are the tap, the UCSB access card. In fact, any of the UCs, any university access card I'm aware of, all use this same technology. The Charlie card when I was in Boston, and then most employers use these to get into the buildings. So if we look at these cards, we'll go through them kind of one by one. The proximity cards, the first ones that came out, these ones, you can kind of recognize them. They look exactly like this one here on the picture. They're a little chunkier, they're a little thicker, and they tend to have these grooves on the outside. These run at 125 kilohertz. So these are kind of the original proximity cards. They are in fact very dumb. So if we're going to use the dumb smart technology, these just get powered by the radio frequency and then will emanate just a static number out. There's no encryption, there's no security here. And in fact, the card typically has a number printed on it. So this one I use an example, literally has a number, 01319, whatever. So you could read that person's card, go rebuild it at home and fake their card to get into the building. So the security on these is effectively not there at all. You can think of this as storing your password instead of on a Post-it and a digital Post-it. They've even shown that you can use modified AM radios to read these cards. Nothing sophisticated needed. The next level up, these ones run at 13.56 megahertz. That's a higher frequency. They can get a little more power. They actually have some processing power. Almost all of these across the boards. So the one that you're using at your hotel room, the Charlie card I was using in Boston, the thing that you're using to get into your dorm room or get into your office, those all actually have some encryption. There's a bunch of different specifications, the different levels of encryption they can use, different protocols that they use. But in general, the idea is the same across the board, where there is a key on the card. Think of this as like a digital key, and the reader has to have that exact same key. So the same way that you would key the front door of your house, there's a key that will, only one key that will unlock it. If the reader knows that key, it can unlock the card and then read the value off of it. Again, it's just going to be a static number. In fact, if you take your ID out and look at the bottom right of it, typically the number is actually printed on there. So that is the exact number that is going to be read out by this reader, and it's protected by this key, right? Then we get on to what I consider the actual smart cards. So these are the ones that have the full-blown processor on them. They have memory. They actually have a full-blown operating systems that's running in Java. So if you hear people say that Java is the most popular language on earth and you tell them that they're wrong, they're probably right, because it runs in every single credit card and every single SIM card on earth. That's a lot of devices. So there's a full-blown operating system just like you'd be running on your desktop PC or on your phone, but miniaturized on these cards, and they can do anything that you would think of cryptographically that you'd want to do, and typically have hardware accelerators in them to speed that up. So the encryption is actually much different on these smart cards. So they actually use public-private key encryption. So I've tried to indicate that here with the keys looking slightly different. But the real idea here is that the private key stays on the card and never leaves. No one will ever know it. but it enables the card to sign messages. So you can send the card a challenge and it can respond and verify that, yes, it was only this card and this private key that responded. And the key that they exported, their public key that you see out here to the right, can be used to verify that, in fact, this message came from that smart card. So it's much different than the scenario before, especially from an attacker's point of view, because now for me to get the key, I have to attack the card, whereas before I could have attacked the reader or the card, or for that matter, any reader or any card with that key on it. So it's a much more secure architecture, and the things you can do with it are actually pretty extensive. So who actually uses these things, right? We've created them. I think we all agree that we've seen them around, but what is the real use case? One of the biggest ones is physical access control. I mean, this kind of revolutionized the keying world in my mind. There's no office on earth that doesn't have some sort of card reader system to get you in and out of the office, rather than rekeying physical keys all the time. Digital authentication is actually a pretty big one. So the entire Department of Defense uses smart cards. Any high security facility, almost without a doubt, is going to use smart cards to interface, with their root portals and all this stuff. Any data centers are going to use them instead of passwords. And then, like I alluded to previously, device identification. So your SIM card is a smart card. You can actually see here that it comes in the same form factor, and you just cut it out differently. I actually have a SIM card cutter that, a nano SIM versus a micro SIM versus a normal SIM. There are literally the exact same thing, that little microchip embedded in plastic, and you just cut the plastic away. The microchip is absolutely tiny, and every SIM card on earth is a smart card, just exact same tech thrown into a phone. And they use that, to do the asymmetric encryption I was talking about earlier. So now that we have all of these, cards all over the world, what's the worst that can happen, right? So my background comes from sort of offensive security. So the things that an attacker can do is they can use the card without a user's permission. This would obviously be bad if we're talking about your credit card or your SIM card or something. They can clone the smart card. So this would be really bad, because this is the whole intent of tying it to the physical hardware. But if there's an attack that they could clone your credit card or clone your ID card to get into work, that's pretty terrible. Or they can attack the system that uses a smart card to subvert the need for it altogether. So I think some of the coolest ways to learn about these technologies is looking at how to break them. So I want to go over really quickly some what I think are the coolest smart card attacks of the last decade. The first one is on the MyFair Classic. So the MyFair Classic was one of the contact sort of memory cards that I said. So this is the same card you would use. It's in fact what the Charlie card is. It's what public transit systems in Boston use. Very similar to what you use to get into your dorm. This did not run a full-blown processor, but instead had a microchip that was customized just for this technology. So the way that they attacked it was actually pretty insane. There was no software running on it. It's all in hardware. So this picture that you're seeing here is from their publication, where they actually dissolved the chip in acid and took pictures of the physical chip without the plastic on it, what you see on the left, and then used image recognition to identify all the different circuits that were used to create that chip over here on the right. And then after they did image classification, they actually were able to lift the algorithm out of that and then break the algorithm after they rebuilt the hardware sort of mathematically, and then broke MyFair Classic. So the result of this is that MyFair cards can now be trivially cloned. There's a tool called MFC UK. You can literally go download this on your computer, throw it on, throw a reader on it, hit enter, and it will break all the keys. This actually still works today on the Charlie card in Boston. You can read the value of anyone's card and do all sorts of crazy stuff. So it's really fun to mess around with your hotel keys and things like that. But pretty catastrophic break, right? This is all built in hardware. There's no way to replace this. So we've moved on to different technologies. One of the other attacks that came out which I think is absolutely fascinating. So over here on the left is the HID reader. So I'm pretty confident that you have a reader that looks just like this at wherever you work or wherever you go to school. And this is using the system I said before. So these cards have shared keys. The interesting thing about this is that the same key is on every single reader and on every single card, right? So if you get access to this key, in theory, you could read every card and also clone every card. So what if this key were leaked? This would be catastrophic, right? This would be really, really bad because every card on earth that's used to get into all these facilities, like the UC schools, for example, would be compromised. So this actually happened a while back. So I actually met the author of this up in Canada at a conference where he was sort of outlining what he was doing. The paper here is called Heart of Darkness, Exploring the Uncharted Backwards, the HID I-class. So because the key had to be on the reader, this guy was a hardware hacker and realized that there were some exposed pins on the back, right? So it's a PIC microcontroller that was running on there. He was able to do some quick little soldering you see here on the right, but there was a hardware vulnerability in one model of the readers, and you only need one, right? It's the same key on all of them. So he was able to use that vulnerability and dump the firmware on the reader and then get the key off of the reader. And with these keys, you can read any I-class card on Earth, and you could clone any I-class card on Earth. So not great. I actually have implemented all of these attacks myself. They totally work. They're very easy to use, hard to implement, hard to do, but once you get it done, yeah, they definitely work. So the response to this is that HID had what they called an elite mode. So rather than every reader, every card on Earth using the same key, which was the old style, they would enable an elite mode so you can have customer specific keys. So the idea here is that even if you hack that one reader and got those keys, you're gonna have a different key, say at Allthenticate, right? The guys, because they had the firmware from Milos's paper, dismantled it. Their paper is called Dismantling the I-Class and the I-Class Elite, and actually found a cryptographic vulnerability in the I-Class Elite where you could literally walk up with an FPGA attached to an antenna and you could suck the key out of the reader, sort of metaphorically, but you could crack the key in like under 10 seconds. And again, we implemented this, tested, it totally works. These guys are not bluffing. Not a great thing. Moving on, during this sort of exploratory smart card portion of my career, we were also looking at the way that you authenticate to these cards. So there's one really interesting mode. You can, because there's a full processor running on actual smart cards, there's an interesting mode where you go into administrative mode and you can actually install programs. They run an operating system, you can install applications, you can do all sorts of cool stuff. We found what looked to be a cryptographic vulnerability. They were using DES, and if you use triple DES with a single key, it's effectively a known broken algorithm. We were tested it. We said like, no, this isn't real. No one would ever do that. Literally months later, this talk was given at Black Hat, where he was able to compromise millions of SIM cards over SMS. So here's kind of the outline from his paper, where he could send SMS messages, spoofed SMS messages to phones and completely take over their SIM cards. Again, not great. So, first I was touting these cards are amazing, and now I just showed you what I believe to be some, highlights of how they can go horribly wrong. But what do all of these attacks have in common? The one trend throughout all of these is they all have bad implementations. So it's nothing wrong with the technology or the idea itself. If we look at the MyFair Classic card, they wrote their own cryptographic algorithm called Crypto1 that just didn't work, right? Cryptography is really, really, really hard. Anytime you roll your own crypto, it's kind of like a running joke in computer security that like it's going to be dead, right? Like no one's going to write a good crypto algorithm themselves. So they tried that. They figured that no one would ever dissolve their chip and image it. People did. It broke. The HID implementation, they kind of just, the fact they were using symmetric keys it was kind of a bad design, but then they just had one hardware vulnerability in all of their readers and the whole thing fell over. With their elite mode, again, they implemented their own crypto algorithm instead of using known good ones. And that's what fell over for them. And then in the SIM card example, they just didn't use the right kind of crypto. So you should not use, if you have triple DES, you should use 3 keys. That's what the 3 in triple DES is. So otherwise, smart cards have really been one of the most secure mechanisms, and in my opinion, one of the best things that our industry has created. They really have stand the test of time in my mind. They've stood up to some pretty insane attacks. And at this point, there's some of the most secure ways that we have to interact with people. So if I'm giving them so much praise, why don't we use them more, right? Like these things are, in my opinion, fantastic. So the reasons I think that to be true, I think they're threefold. One, they don't scale well. So could you imagine having a smart card for every single place that you currently have a password, right? We'd all need a backpack of cards, and you go to log into a website and you're flipping through all your different smart cards and plugging them in, and there's no way people are going to do that. It's just not practical. The other bummer is they require extra hardware. So the trend for computing is, we're going smaller and we're going more convenient. We have phones in our pockets. Our laptops can fit in, envelopes. And now you need to carry on this big clunky smart card reader with you everywhere to interface this card with, whatever it is you're dealing with at the time. And you have a backpack of cards. And then the final one is they don't have a user interface. So at this point, they're only ever something you have. And YubiKey does a better job at that than a smart card and offers kind of sort of the same guarantees. So there are other alternatives for this, something you have that might not be as secure, but are a little more convenient to carry. So can we do better? I mean, it seems like we developed this pretty epic technology that does really impressive things. It'd be a shame to just see it die. So it seems like the things that we want is something that can scale a little better, where we don't need a different one for every service. Something that we don't have to carry around special hardware with, and something that has user interface built in. So one thing that immediately comes to mind would be like a super smart card, right? A smart card, but with all of these features that has all these cool interfaces and a touch screen on it. And oh yeah, I think we already have it, right? So it's a smartphone. We carry these around today, and the industry's kind of been, I guess, behind the curtains working on this. So it's kind of already in place. In fact, smartphones today already have a secure element installed in them. This has existed for, a while at this point. Since NFC has been on smartphones, they've had secure elements. The secure element is literally the exact same chip that's in the smart card, but now, on the phone instead of in a piece of plastic. So anytime you're using Apple Pay or Google Pay or any of those things, I hope they claim, and I have no reason to doubt them, that is using the secure element and is actually using a smart card on board of your phone. They also have trusted execution environments. This is built into every phone on Earth today, thanks to ARM. And what this does is gives you that way to interact with the smart card in a secure way. So even if there's malware on the phone, malware on the computer, you can actually jump into this secure trusted execution environment and interface directly with the smart card to approve, in this case, a financial transaction or to enter your PIN, for example. So in my mind, the future of smart cards is that they're just going to be wrapped in phones. I mean, it's already here, right? We're kind of seeing it unfold slowly but surely. Now that Google Payment and Apple Pay are a little more ubiquitous, I think we're just going to see it more and more. And in theory, you can replace everything in your wallet with your phone, right? The security's there, the technology's there, and the phone can interface with anything, whereas your credit card can only interface with a credit card reader. So this is what we're trying to build at my company. This is sort of the vision that I've had going through looking at all these security vulnerabilities throughout my career. And the idea is that, we have this awesome smart card wrapped in a phone. If we implement it securely, we can use it to, like I said, replace everything in the wallet and even go beyond that, right? Where we're interacting with everything in a secure way that has all this cool anti-tamper stuff built in. So What's next? It's literally just a smart card wrapped in a smartphone. And you can find out more about it, my company and what we're doing. We're calling it the Authentication Revolution. And I thank you so much. And I will take any questions.
All right, thank you, Chad, for that really great presentation. A lot of good information there. So we will start going through the questions. Feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A section and we will answer them. So first question is from Andrea, and she says, I'm a security analyst, and one of the things I often have to do is review the security of proposed projects. So what questions should I ask of projects that want to use smart cards?
I guess it's the context of the project, right? So what are the security needs? Smart cards have a pretty steep usability versus security trade-off. So you're going to get a lot of security, but the usability is going to be pretty awful. So it's sort of, does it require that level of security would be my question. And then provisioning becomes a huge issue. So if you're looking at provisioning smart cards, it's pretty straightforward, but I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing to do on earth. So yeah, that has to be project specific. I think I would need more details to really give you some real insights.
Alrighty. The next question, I think this is funny. Not sure that you have the answer, but we'll see. So how do the hotels which host DEF CON handle their room access cards, given that there will be so many people around who are so good at figuring out how things work and finding ways around them?
So I'm not sure how much you know about DEF CON, but historically, it's been tough to convince a hotel to host us for very long. They seem to not have a good time when they invite all the world's greatest hackers into their hotel. I think it was 2 years ago, a guy found an attack where I said, subverting the smart card altogether is one of the best attacks, where he made a thing look like a Sharpie that could plug into the bottom of the hotel key reader and unlock any hotel door. So not a smart card attack, but super annoying, especially when you announce that attack to all these hackers staying at the hotel. The hotels hate us, I think, is the answer to that question. They typically don't have a good time when we're there.
That's funny. Okay, next question is the Apple Card a smart card?
I assume you're asking about the Apple credit card, and yeah, absolutely. If it has the little contact chip on it, for sure. I'm assuming they're doing the proper things there that any other credit card company would be doing.
For sure. Next question, has anyone run Doom on a smart card?
I don't know, actually, because there's not a nice user interface. I don't think it's as ideal of a target. The most recent thing I saw Doom running on that was interesting was a pregnancy test. So that actually did have like a 50 pixel by 50 pixel output, and they were able to play Doom on it. So I'm sure someone's tried it since there's a processor, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay. And then addressing the earlier question about asking questions for security projects, more details were given. So physicians want to tap cards to log into our electronic health record system so they don't have to constantly use passwords. They want to start with the baseline standard badges, so not a full-fledged smart card.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, this would be really easy to implement. They even have readers that will just emulate keyboards. So creating a UI for that's pretty straightforward. If the security standards allow it, you could hook up those readers. And like I said, it's pretty much the equivalent of a digital Post-it note. So instead of putting your password on a Post-it note, you put it on this digital card and you tap it and it'll read the number. You might want to put those in they have sleeves that you can put them in to make sure other people can't read them. But that's sort of up to you and how much of a risk you think it is of somebody, cloning these cards.
Okay. So next question. You mentioned that good smart card readers will only accept the key from a unique card. How is this uniqueness aspect implemented?
So if we're talking about like your badge to get into a building, the uniqueness is that shared key that I was talking about. So the reader and the reader and the card have to have the exact same key on it. That guarantees that they can access it. If we're talking about my credit card, for example, there is a private key on the card that say Chase Bank is going to vouch on behalf, right? And say that, yes, this is a private key that we gave to Chad Spensky, and this is his credit card. So it's, you can think of it as a unique random number, but it's actually more than that because it's a random number that has a bunch of very cool mathematical properties to do the cryptography. So yeah, in both scenarios, it has to do with the key on the card is the unique thing.
Okay. And the next question is about Apple Pay. So I know that you kind of mentioned this earlier in your talk about the emerging relevance of smart cards on mobile. But the question is, do you use things, I guess, personally, like Apple Pay in the sense that are they ready enough to be used by more paranoid security types?
Yeah, the answer to that is very much yes. Over a mag stripe, Apple Pay is infinitely more secure. I mean, there's actually some cryptography going on there versus just a magnetic thing gliding over, a magnetic reader. As far as that versus a credit card, again, I like it more because of the user interface aspect, right? Because there's something where I have to acknowledge that, yes, I want to use this and it verifies me. Whereas if you find my card on the ground, I'm done, right? So personally, I use Apple Pay as much as I can. And you get a nice log of the transactions, things like that, an instant notification when it goes through. So having a really nice user interface and some way to talk to the user is pretty critical.
And then kind of on that note, but I suppose getting off the topic of smart cards slightly, is what about other electronic money transfer systems and their sort of overall security? So Venmo, Pop Money, PayPal, things like that.
Oh man, I can't advocate for any one specific company here. The only thing I can comment on is that getting access to the secure element itself in an iPhone or an Android phone is pretty tough to do if you're not Google or Apple. So I'm pretty confident that Apple Pay and Google Pay are using the secure element and doing it, hopefully properly, but at least using the hardware correctly. I use Venmo. I think it's great. But I don't want to advocate it and say, it's super secure, right? I don't know their engineers. I don't know how good they are at security. I'm hoping very good, but I can't really speak to that.
Okie doke. Next question. When buying an off-the-shelf system, should we ask about levels of encryption, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. So if you're just buying a random smart card, so if you're going with like the HID readers to get into a building, so they have the iClass, there's also the iClass SE. So the cloning vulnerabilities still exist on the iClass SE, but they're at least using AES encryption now to wrap it. So cloning it, it's significantly harder. You need to do some pretty cool stuff. So for those cards, I would definitely question that. For other cards that aren't necessarily used for physical access control, there's one called the MyFair DESFire, which again uses DES, which is a known encryption algorithm. It's much better. But yeah, I would look into it. The pricing is marginally different, right? They're little embedded things, so they're pretty cheap. But I would definitely get one that is not trivially broken by somebody who downloaded a program.
And next question. Do we have to do anything to keep our smart cards from breaking, such as not running them through the washing machine?
Yeah, I think that's another issue that Smartcards has. It didn't make my top 3 list, but Yeah, you can definitely screw them up pretty bad. I know microwaving them is really not good. You don't want to do that. The washing machine and stuff should be fine. The one thing that you worry about there is rust, right? Because you have metal contacts on the outside that are going to oxidize. And I've definitely got to the point with some of my cards where like they just don't really ever seem to work anymore. So yeah, the fact they're a little physical metal thing, you got to worry about beating them up for sure, but they're built to be robust. I think they know that most people are going to forget their wallet in their pants at least once, so it should survive.
All right. So can you please tell us a little bit more about how Allthenticate is superior to smart cards?
Ah, what a question. So I think the one thing that's interesting there, right? From a security standpoint, we're not trying to be superior. It's kind of what I said. It's a smart card wrapped in a nice user interface. So what Allthenticate is trying to do is just facilitate all of those interactions so that you have this secure hardware already built into your phone and just give you a nice way to use that to do things in your daily life. Log into your computer, get into your office, start your car, make a payment, vote online, prove your identity, all those kind of things, right? So the hardware is already there thanks to the hardware manufacturers, and we're just trying to create a product that enables, sort of unlocks its potential.
All right. Next question. What about RFID blocking wallets? Do they do anything?
Yes, they do. I typically try to get an RFID blocking wallet or get a credit card that doesn't have tap to pay. So what tap to pay enables attackers to do is, how sophisticated they are, you can sort of guess, but I can actually do a relay attack where I can have my buddy stand next to you while you're sitting at lunch. And then I go up and pay with something that looks like a credit card, but is speaking to your credit card wirelessly. So those kind of attacks are realistic. Again, it depends on how high value you are, that kind of stuff. But in general, I'm not a huge fan of people just being able to use my credit card without my permission. So yeah, it's definitely not a bad idea to get some sort of shielding.
All right. And next question is a bit of an analogy. So can we think of smart card authentication systems as password managers where the key is the password, or is that analogy off?
That analogy would be off. So a password manager would aggregate all of your passwords in one place where you have a master password to kind of unlock them. This one, a better analogy is to think of it as a physical key and a physical lock, I think, where the smart card is your thing that you have, and then you can use that to unlock other things, where there's only one key in the smart card that can unlock different things. Hopefully that helps.
Cool. Next question, and this is something I'm wondering myself. So it looks like my credit card has a stripe and a chip. Sometimes when I buy something, the vendor swipes my card and sometimes the vendor uses the chip. Does having a stripe on a card with a chip negate the benefits of having a chip over a stripe?
100%. Yeah, this anytime they stripe it, it's like, yeah, your credit card's probably gone. But the bigger problem that we're having now is sort of in that area is online sales, right? Because you don't really insert the chip when you do online sales, and that's how most credit card theft. I think it's typically at gas stations or from a website that's not doing security correctly. But yeah, I mean, the sooner that the US can start using chip only would be fantastic. Again, I think the Europeans just kind of look at us and shake their head. They've been doing this for a while. They don't understand why we still don't have a chip and pin system. And I'm kind of on board with them from a security perspective. And as someone who gets my credit card stolen at least once a year, I'm a little annoyed. Like, just, I have the chip, let me use the chip. So given the option, yeah, I mean, use the chip. It's new technology. For any reason, use the new stuff.
For sure. So kind of off that question, would you say that most credit card companies using the best security now with the embedded computer, if you will?
I don't know, actually. I don't know what they put in their credit cards. I would assume yes. I would hope yes that they're using the latest and greatest and are tracking all the vulnerabilities out there and things like that. I think they have a lot of financial incentive to do so. And there's actually another interesting thing there, why Europeans are a little more updated. So it has to do with the legal system, their liability. So in the US, if my credit card gets stolen, my bank is on the hook to give me the money back, right? So they're financially incentivized to make sure it works. Whereas in Europe, I believe the liability is flipped, that if you lose your credit card, you're on the hook because you shouldn't have lost your chip and PIN. So sort of the incentives in the US at least are aligned in our favor that the company should be doing the right thing because they're on the hook for the money.
Interesting. So what technology does tap to pay use? And if that's spoofable, why are they still using it?
It's easy, right? People want they want to do the cool tap thing and like feel cool about it. The technology that they're using, they can actually do it securely, right? So smart cards can speak the same protocol over wireless that they do over contact. That's a thing. The problem is that because there's no PIN required, you can just relay it as if that was the card that I tapped, right? So I'll have a fake card, I tap it and it just has an antenna to your card. So it's as if I just took your card from 50 feet away and put it 1 inch away from the reader. So the real problem there is the interface is wireless. So you have no clue if it's being used or not. And the way you do that is you take the wireless signal, make it wired, retransmit over wire, and then go back to an antenna.
All right. And it looks like our last question. So this will be the last call for questions. If you have any, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A because we still have a few minutes left if there are any more questions floating out there. But for now, this question is, I think, inspired by the gas station conversation.
Yeah.
So at a gas station, the reader asks for your billing zip code. How does the reader know if you entered the correct zip code?
Yeah, so they'll talk to your bank directly. So them asking for the zip code is trying to get around the fact that we don't use PINs in the US, right? So it's too easy to just steal someone's credit card number and use it. So because we don't have a PIN, they try and do a second factor because typically, I've never been into credit card theft, but I've heard that when you steal a credit card, the step one is like figure out if it works. So you'll go to a gas station because there's a lot of them and do like a $1 transaction. So gas stations in particular are targeted with a lot of fake credit cards. So they add that second layer where they just check with the bank, effectively try to run a transaction, right? Like a mock transaction, say, would this go through? Bank says, no, that's not the right zip code. So it's not encoded on your card. It has to be some out of band communication with the bank, at least as far as I know.
And that makes sense. So what is the range of RFID?
So this depends on the frequency and the RFID tag. So the 1.25 kilohertz ones can be pretty big. The 13.5 megahertz, so they call it near field communication for a reason. It's not supposed to work outside of a couple inches. A big enough antenna, enough power, you can get this up to a couple feet. There's been some hypothesized attacks where you could fit something like a big antenna in a briefcase and read some cards. But in theory, it should be pretty close. It should be, within an inch or two. And I'm sure if you've tried to use these cards, it even gets annoying that sometimes it's too close where you're physically tapping it and it's not reading it. So yeah, they're pretty limited. But the old school ones, just because of the bandwidth that they're using or the frequency they're on, you can get them pretty far away.
All right. So that concludes the questions that we have, I believe. Oh, one more. So this is sort of a repeat question. But what is your feeling on the Apple Card? Is it as secure as others?
I have not played with the Apple Card at all. I don't think I have enough knowledge of it to really speak to it.
Fair enough.
So.
All right then. So that concludes our session. Thank